From a Samsung Galaxy Ace to a Nexus 4 to a Nexus 5 to a Moto X Play to a Note 7, I've spent my fair share of time on Android, but I've never really had some quality time with iOS. My thoughts on the OS itself would be better served in another video, but this is my review of the iPhone 7. Aside from the colors available, and I do really love the matte black, the outside of the iPhone 7 is pretty familiar to anyone with experience with the iPhone 6 or 6S. And I'm not complaining at all about the dimensions. I like the size of the phone, it's thin, and it's nice to be able to reach things without so many hand gymnastics. This is the first time in a while I've had a non-phablet phone. As to the lack of headphone jack, more on that later, like the end of the video. What the phone does have at the bottom is a single lightning port for charging and syncing with iTunes and connecting light phone headphones or adapters, which you may have a lot of these days, and 2 sets of grills. Interestingly, the grill on the right is for speakers and the grill on the left is for the microphone, even though the phone does have stereo speakers. On the phone's right side, we have a sturdy, very clicky lock button and a nano SIM card tray, and on the left we have 2, in my experience, less clicky but still great volume buttons and a silent mode switch. On the top of the phone is clear of any ports, and the back is where the camera lives. A 12 megapixel f1.8 aperture shooter with 5 times digital zoom, optical image stabilization, 4K video at 30 FPS, 1080p video at 30 FPS, 60 FPS, 1080p slow-mo at 120 FPS, or 720p slow-mo at 240 FPS, and True Tone Flash. More on the rear camera later. And there's also a camera bump, by the way. But it's not bad. It doesn't really bother me even out of the case, and if you are using a case, it should fill it in pretty well so the phone still sits flat. The front of the phone has an earpiece at the top, which doubles as a speaker for media. The speaker serves mainly as a tweeter, doing more of the high-frequency stuff, while the speaker on the bottom provides most of the volume and the bass. But it certainly helps and is enough to call the phone stereo. Next, we have the front-facing FaceTime camera featuring 7 megapixel f2.2 shooting and retina flash, which is when the screen lights up to brighten up selfies. Again, we'll come back to the cameras. The screen is a 4.7-inch IPS display with a 1334 by 750 resolution, and this is one thing I really like. While a lot of people would trash the phone for having a display that's just over 325 pixels per inch, I actually find that's plenty. I've used phones around 450 ppi, and for me, the difference you can actually see on a day-to-day basis without holding the phone up to your face and looking at it is not at all worth the battery life trade-off. I know some people can see the difference more than others, but as long as I'm hitting the 300 pixels per inch zone, it's great for me, and it helps the battery life because we're not pushing more performance just for the sake of pixels. The home button, or should I call it a home area, isn't actually a button. It doesn't really move. Instead, it's just using a vibrating motor Apple calls the haptic engine to simulate the feel of a click. It feels a bit more like the whole bottom of the phone is clicking than the button itself, but I've gotten used to it and I actually quite like it. You can also adjust it 3 settings for how clicky you want it to be. I've showed it to people who've liked it more than the real button on their older iPhone. I do have one friend who upgraded recently from a 6 to a 7. She said it took her a little while to get used to it, but she's fine with it now. At first she didn't like it at all. The biggest downfall of all this for me is that clicking the button when the phone is sitting on a table feels a lot less clicky. You don't notice it as much than when the phone is sitting in your hand and you push it and you can really feel the clickiness. The Touch ID sensor is great. I love that it's fast enough to actually skip the lock screen. If I want to just check my notifications, I hit the dedicated lock button on the right, but if I want to use the phone, I hit the home button and I'm in pretty near instantly. If you are on the lock screen and decide to unlock it, a quick tap will do it. Now we've covered the outside of the device, let's talk about how all of this performs. I'll start with the cameras. The low light performance, in particular on the rear-facing camera, is really quite good. Yeah, there's a lot of grain because it's low light, but there were a couple times I snapped a picture of a cat or something only to be surprised it was actually usable, and far more brightly lit subjects are really clear, and the camera launches quickly and focuses fast. All in all, everything looks great, And yes, you may have noticed winter certainly has come to Atlantic Canada. One thing I might prefer about the camera is if there was more in the way of a quick launch shortcut. Right now all there really is from the lock screen, you can swipe to the right to get to the camera. It's still pretty quick, but I like on Samsung phones, for example, double tapping the home button to get to it. The selfie cam is pretty solid too, producing clear pictures in bright light and very usable pictures in less ideal situations. As far as the stereo speakers I mentioned earlier, they're pretty good. I'm happy with them. The bottom firing speaker does get covered while I'm playing games or watching a video, depending on how I'm holding the phone, but I've gotten used to it and now I'm better at positioning my hand so it doesn't happen. And bottom firing speakers have become pretty common on phones, so I guess it's something we're just going to have to live with for now. It's not really that bad. The screen looks great. There's not much more to say about it than that. It looks crisp and colors look solid. Editing a photo in Lightroom on the phone is probably about as good as it can be when the phone is this size. Obviously a bigger screen would be ideal for editing pictures. My biggest complaint is actually about the bezels on the side of the screen. Coming from my Note 7, which was practically bezel-less, thanks in part to the curved edges, the bezels here are pretty huge and kind of ugly. Performance is a strong suit for the phone. It's packing Apple's in-house A10 Fusion 64-bit processor with embedded M10 Motion coprocessor and 2 GB of RAM, 1 GB less than its big brother, the iPhone 7 Plus. It performs really well in multitasking and gaming, and it does get pretty warm sometimes, but I haven't seen any actual slowdowns like I used to see on my Note 7 in games, like Angry Birds 2. Basically, I found gaming a lot more smooth on iOS than I ever did on Android from a performance standpoint. One thing I have noticed, however, is random crashes in Angry Birds 2 and Rovercraft. I'll be playing and completely randomly, it'll be back on the home screen, the app just completely crashed out. I don't know if it's a Unity bug, as I think both games use the Unity engine or what, but it's annoying, and not something I ever experienced on Android. And while we're talking about stability, there were twice where the phone suddenly locked up and I couldn't use any of the buttons, the physical buttons on the phone, only the touchscreen. This would happen for 10 to 30 seconds or so and then fix itself. It was really annoying. Originally it only happened twice, but since writing this review, between then and the time I shot it, it's happened a couple more times. So, generally, however, at this point, I'd say iOS actually feels a little less stable than Android. Flame away. The performance is excellent, but random crashes and lockups are annoying even when rare, and they did happen. Let's talk battery life. I usually get through a day if I'm not playing a lot of games or generally doing a lot of heavy usage, like spending a ton of time with the screen on. I don't think it's quite as good as my Note 7, but it is really consistent, and that's nice, and it's a small phone with a small battery. The fact that they can do this with a 1960 milliamp hour battery is pretty impressive. There isn't much more to say about this device that isn't a direct reflection of iOS itself, which again, I'm going to make a separate video on, so subscribe if you do want to see that. So the last thing I'll talk about before getting in the headphone jack is Force Touch. It's pretty cool. I love to use it in the settings app to jump right into where I want to. Peek and pop is really cool in a lot of apps, and there actually is a decent number that support it, but half the time I forget it's there. I guess that's my problem. Hands down, however, the most useful part of Force Touch is using it on the Apple keyboard or the Google keyboard, as both support it, to move the cursor around when entering text. It's so useful and definitely the easiest way to do it. I love it. Makes fixing typos way less of a pain. Now let's talk about the headphone jack and the haptic engine, because it's my understanding that the haptic engine is to blame for the headphone jack being gone. It takes up too much space. It is cool. Using a spinner in an app like the web browser or the timer app is actually pretty awesome. It's hard to describe, but the phone vibrates in the perfect way to feel like you're clicking through the options. And the first time I found it in the Alarms app, I actually handed the phone to my girlfriend for her to try it, and she too thought it was awesome. All that said, I am upset about the lack of a headphone jack. For the amount of benefit we get versus the loss and convenience, it feels a bit like a slap in the face. For some people it won't matter, and I do just keep my included adapter on my daily driver headphones when I take them out of the house, but it's still annoying. If I was in someone's car without the headphones, which is pretty plausible because I really only take headphones to school, and wanted to plug my phone in to show them a song and Bluetooth wasn't an option, I couldn't do it. And maybe it seems like I'm looking for a really specific example so I have something to complain about, but consider that almost any other phone in the world wouldn't have this problem. I don't see how you could possibly say that the haptic engine makes up for that. We'll see what phones are like in 2 years. Maybe Apple was right. I suspect Apple will make a lot of money thanks to the lack of the headphone jack. When people's included lightning adapters and lightning headphones wear out and they turn to buying more, it'll be a decent bit of extra revenue for Apple. I also have to wonder, they're probably making money even on third-party lightning headphones like Bose headphones because that's a proprietary connector, and I would guess that those OEMs who make lightning headphones have to pay a licensing fee. The whole thing is just a bit frustrating. It's not exactly a deal breaker for me, but if the headphone jack is important to you, like it is to some people who listen to music all the time, I will point out that the iPhone 6s is nearly as fast as this phone in real-world performance and has a headphone jack. And for a lower price, too. The last thing I'll say on this matter is I almost wouldn't be surprised if next year Apple manages to shrink the haptic engine and include the headphone jack again with the haptic engine to much fanfare. I don't know. I just want to throw it out there. If that happens, I can say I called it. So yeah, I would recommend the phone in certain situations. If you're okay with the lack of headphone jack, like I said, it does come with a 3.5mm headphone adapter and a set of lightning headphones, or you share some sort of anxiety about entering a carrier contract for anything but the latest phone, it's a good choice. But if you're coming from an iPhone 6 or older, or you're looking to try iOS for the first time, it's an okay choice. It's not that the phone is only okay. The phone is great, but compared to its predecessor, it improves very little. I haven't used the 6S, alright? So call me a hypocrite. But we can all look up specs and reviews and impressions and speed tests, and the reality is this phone is barely any faster. The camera is, of course, a little bit better and the screen is better, but all in all, the biggest difference is you're dropping the headphone jack and adding the haptic engine. So if that's something you care about at all, in my opinion, get the 6S. But that's it, guys. Thanks a ton for watching. These are, of course, just my opinions, and if you disagree, that's fine. I do still think the phone is great. The headphone jack just irks me maybe more than other people. Make sure to like if you liked the video and subscribe if you want to see that other video about my experience on iOS as a longtime Android user. Do you think I'm going to stay with this phone? Well, you'll have to watch that to find out. Let me know your thoughts with a comment on this video, and I will see you in my next one. Thanks for watching.